Hello and welcome to session 321 in the AIsafety.com reading group. Tonight we'll discuss the article What We Learned from Briefing 70 Plus Lawmakers on the Threat from AI by Leticia Garcia Martinez. Before diving into Leticia's lessons, let's step back and ask whether talking to lawmakers is even worthwhile. This is an important question and it's been on my mind for almost a decade. I've consistently rated the cost effectiveness of outreach to politicians moderately below the least effective thing that I do have time and energy for. Because preparation is costly. Effective meetings absolutely require preparation, and that takes a lot of effort across many dimensions. Of course, a lot of this preparation can be reused. So if you have many more meetings, then the cost becomes lower, and I expect you get much more effective with practice as well. But the effectiveness is a problem because it does seem low. Because even if I convinced a lawmaker, then they would ask me what would be an effective course of action, and I'd be stumped. But this is an area where I have a substantial uncertainty. There are certainly non-trivial asks that I could go for. The most obvious one is to sign a public statement or an open letter, which is what Leticia recommends. This gives political cover, makes a political cover cheap, and makes public pressure visible. A more ambitious ask would be to present the California SB 1047 draft AI legislation. That is what Akashwa Shield suggests, though of course me being in Denmark means that this might not be quite as relevant. Leticia also highlights the importance of building common knowledge with the lawmakers, and Akash suggests substantial value in creating a network of staffers who are sympathetic to reducing existential risk from AI. One personal consideration is that there is a cost in the aversiveness of the task. It's never fun to be the bearer of bad news, and I do bring really bad news. On the other hand, it is conceivable that lawmakers, they know more about their own strategic situation, and for that reason, answering their questions might be very high impact and higher impact than what I would naively expect. Finally, I'm not just a utilitarian, so a substantial consideration for me is that warning your representatives is a virtuous act, and that is in fact a pretty weighty argument for me. Leticia's biggest takeaway is in understanding what's actually motivating lawmakers, and that's something that I still don't really feel that I grasp. One central point is that most of them really don't know much about existential risk from AI or even about artificial intelligence in general. This was kind of what I expected, and the way I've usually seen this is indicative of a personality type that has a hard time taking ideas seriously. Because in my volunteer experience, people with that kind of mindset seldom end up contributing meaningfully to AI safety work. But volunteers and lawmakers live in different time scarcities. So there's a sense that volunteers have too much time and lawmakers have too little time. Leticia doesn't deny this. She simply attributes lawmakers' inaction mainly to capacity constraints. And I would have guessed at different underlying reasons, like lack of interest in AI and existential risk, as well as the incentives being pointed towards other things. There's a refreshing lack of cynicism in Leticia's description. And presumably parliamentarians want to make the world a better place, which is why they take on that job. And for that reason, we should skip strategic communication and just communicate directly, honestly, and sincerely. That's of course nice, but I don't really know about the incentives as much as I really want. Like there is a few that I suspect. You can see them here. Like it's a long, non-standard, confusing list that I've written up here. And Letitia's experience is helpful here, but I'm really still noticing my confusion on this point. Okay, so how do we get started? How do we actually secure a meeting with a lawmaker? And I say meeting, even though Letitia has done some Zoom meetings, then I believe that an in-person meeting is much better for conveying nonverbal cues than something like Zoom. Letitia made cold emails to individual politicians, and that approach worked. That was a bit surprising. It didn't hurt her credibility, because I would have thought that you have to rely on cold calling. That's a substantial negative impression. Um, she also advises persistent following up, because lawmakers are busy and they often really appreciate reminders. And again, I would have guessed that this kind of repeated nudges might backfire and seem desperate, but her experience says otherwise. Um, and of course, once you have one meeting that is going well, then you should try to ask for introductions. And this, to me, sounds like a much more effective hook. If you can open by saying, "Hi, Alice, Bob and Carol suggested that I contact you," then this thing matters. Akash even tried not just targeting, but a single mass email, and he still got solid engagement. And that's another result that updates my priors. So there is an unavoidable meta point here, right? That my prior model was overconfident. So I'm updating towards much greater uncertainty about how this works. You should prepare. That's obvious. Uh, you have to prepare quite a bit before you meet with a lawmaker, and it's obvious to me, and hopefully also obvious to anyone considering this. But in addition to this, Letitia still suggests that we should prep more for each meeting than you'd naively suggest. And over preparing isn't free. If it takes weeks to prep for a meeting, then I'll just probably skip the meeting because it fails this cost effectiveness bar. So I would really like something like a concrete checklist. Like, what exactly should I learn about a parliamentarian beforehand? She recommends some books on how the parliament works. Of course, those are specific to countries. So in Denmark, I'll need some local equivalents. She also cites classics like How to Win Friends and Influence People. Fair enough. Maybe I need something something slimmer and more narrowly targeted to lobbyism. Maybe there's a lobbying 101 book, lobbying for dummies. I don't know if that exists. One specific piece of advice is to prepare a list of articles about existential risk from AI in mainstream media. And I'm preparing a package of this seems worthwhile, and particularly you can match the outlets to the MP's leanings. So the liberals will probably be more impressed by an article in The Economist, I imagine. Akash recommends role playing, which is excellent for pressure testing your answers. And I think one idea would be some kind of practice meeting with Akash, because that would, in addition to being practice, that would inform the decision whether you should actually hold the meeting. So Akash, if you're listening, would you be up for a practice run? Okay, you've set up a meeting and you need to craft a pitch, and that's both hard and crucial. One important thing to keep in mind is inferential distances. They may be very long, and you might need to lay quite a bit of groundwork before you can come to your conclusions about X risk. And you can't really dump your full model. That's not going to work. So you need to pick a tight narrative. I would have liked some guidance on like roughly how long, but that isn't really stated in Letitia's article. But one thing that's important is that if you get a lawmaker to sign something like an open letter, then they need to be able to answer questions later. Not so they not just need to be convinced, but be able to verbalize that. So they need some kind of memorable, repeatable lines. So I preparing a list of arguments is really beneficial. In particular, simple one-liners like AI is not built; it is grown. Um, and that also means that you could often get a hook in by focusing on timely issues, like a conference coming up or something like that. And that's helpful for setting up the meeting, but the actual pitch can't refer to them. So there's a sense that the hot news might open the door, but the pitch itself must be evergreen. That's a pretty substantial constraints, all of these, on how to make the pitch. And I can see how this kind of constraint really tempts presenters to oversimplify. The suggested rule of thumb is to keep 80% of your pitch the same in every meeting and use the remaining 20% to explore new arguments and see how they land. Of course, this isn't optimal, like 80-20. You should use a Bayesian control rule. I'm just kidding, of course. So when you practice your pitch, think about how would you get feedback on this? Because the default expectation is a polite nod, so that isn't real feedback. But there are other ways to get feedback, particularly nonverbal. And feedback from staffers is especially worthwhile because they can be more open and the stakes are lower. So this is the place where you can experiment both with the pitch itself and with attributes like how long should it be, how technical, how spicy should it be, and things like that. Letitia suggests 3 general areas that the pitch should consider through her experience of how to present talking points to lawmakers. So one other option that I would highlight as the obvious default option is to not write your own pitch at all, but just reuse an existing pitch or at least borrow heavily from prior art. So the first area is statements from relevant authorities. The second is analogizing to other industries with higher standards for risk. And the third is presenting some of the current empirical evidence for misalignment. So I recognize here, of course, that Letitia is right and I'm wrong, but I want to explicitly flag that my instincts point towards inside view arguments. Because I wouldn't change my own views based on authorities or weak analogies, but legislators often do. So I obviously recognize that trying to explain to a lawmaker what is instrumental convergence, what is consequentialism, that's probably not the way. So let's look at how she actually deploys these 3 levers. Quoting authorities, it feels anti-nullius in verba, which is Latin for take no one's word, but it works. It is an effective strategy because you can borrow the credibility of some really genuinely impressive signatories. I don't know much about Letitia, but I do in fact consider myself pretty well versed in the actual arguments. But unfortunately, credibility often beats ability in politics. So one really attractive example of this is the Center for AI Safety's AI X-Risk statement, where you can point to the 1,000 expert signatories. I really like Letitia's description of how this is done. It's a very empathetic way to connect with the lawmaker over this. Like people like you are taking this threat seriously. I really like that. One thing you should consider in your pitch is whether to focus on the hard existential risks or focusing on the loss of control. And I think the latter may be more palatable because politicians presumably know about power intuitively. But I'd like some tools for comparing the 2 options or statistics. One substantial advantage of the indirect argument is that then you can present polls that are supporting this and sympathetic media coverage. So overall, I find the authority-based pitch the strongest of the three, though Letitia doesn't rank them. The second framing is the industry analogy, where you compare frontier AI labs to other high-risk sectors. So when you build bridges or certified drugs, in general, safety comes first, and AI needs the same. It's a pretty grounded argument, yes, but it's also weaker, and the parallels leak in many places. AI models have really extreme externalities that bridge building does not have. Letitia suggests taking examples from civil engineering, medicine, aircraft manufacturing, and well, I do know a bit about aircraft maintenance, and I really think that quite a bit of professional knowledge probably is a requirement here, because you need to prep enough domain facts to survive some kind of cross-examination. Since I'm from Denmark, then a Denmark-friendly swap may be to climate change. So the labs become oil companies and the emission maps to existential risks. And I think you need to tailor this analogy to your audience. The third framing is empirical evidence, like concerning demos of scheming and misalignment, sandbagging, and all these other red flags. And these are obviously much more concrete. And especially within the area called loss of control, then you can really directly point to signs of troubling behavior. And this is valuable, I agree. But I often feel the empirical strength really is overstated by the advocates. And I would very much prefer not to overstate the case. But another advantage of these is that we have some pretty good write-ups of them already. And we have write-ups in words that are much more acceptable to policymakers. And I think we could go further than this and just not take more than the descriptions, but also talk about, like, why did we in fact predict these observations that we are now seeing? Why did we predict them a decade ago? One thing I would just side note here, I would really like to see Letitia's full empirical slide deck, because I'd be interested to hear how she does this. But of course, the empirical evidence is a moving target, and we are likely to get more evidence of misalignment as time goes on, so we should be on the lookout for that. Personally, I think the system cards are valuable, and especially the responsible scaling policies, which I interpret as roadmaps, and I think this is a really effective frame. One common theme in AI X-risk outreach is that everyone has different responses, and lawmakers also push back in different ways. And let's catalog some of the common ones. I know I'm asking for a lot with like explicit statistics, but Letitia has ran an experiment 70 times, and it's a shame not to systematize the pushback that she's getting. One common reply is that ChatGPT is just very impressive. Like maybe people have some old experience with it, or they just lack curiosity. And when the tech CEOs say, yeah, this can be really dangerous, then they might dismiss this as just hype, because they are used to thinking in the incentives. And so they think of the incentives of the CEO, and they are perhaps right to be skeptical about that. And I think I can come up with many possible counterexamples, but I do need some preparation. So this is a kind of pushback that you definitely need to prepare for. I do hesitate to spend a lot of time optimizing here, because I expect that someone who's like really a hardcore skeptic, they wouldn't take meetings really. So you need to allocate the prep time proportionally. Another potential issue is defeatism in more or less overt forms. And I think this is in fact a key challenge. And this is where I would substantially prepare. Possibly by distinguishing personal helplessness from helplessness in what the lawmaker can do, and global helplessness. But the real antidote to defeatism is a concrete ask. Like, you sign this open letter, but then I need to explain the theory of impact, and I can do that. But the thing I can't do is to give good options. And this is a central problem for me. And this is something that I need to think about. Because like how open should I be about my overall strategic outlook? I need to decide in advance how much of the broader strategy you're comfortable sharing. Because it's just something that you should decide like on the fly. Don't leave that to chance. Lawmakers don't have much time, and sometimes they get some pretty basic facts wrong. And that's unavoidable. And given the part of the value proposition of these meetings is correcting misconceptions, then I think this should just be embraced. And asking questions like, if this continues, then what, to like probe their model, is likely a central part of these meetings. A final kind of challenge is some underlying beliefs that undermine the case for existential risk, like smart AI can't be evil, right? And these are basically counter-arguments, and these are, of course, right up my alley, right? I would welcome them with open arms and enjoy diving into. I might enjoy that a bit too much, though. I am ambivalent about basic etiquette tips because if you truly need them, then perhaps you shouldn't go. But I think the basics do matter, and I think it's fair to write them down. And so one of the good news is that these meetings usually go smoothly because the lawmaker already chose to attend. And I would be quite averse to even a small failure rate, so I appreciate to hear they generally go well. The most basic tips is in the introduction, start with a warm greeting, use their name, open posture, genuine smile, um, and listen deeply to the words of the parliamentarian. That's important also from a social perspective. One of the ways that we show respect is by being clear, honest, and direct. Less obvious is the required balance between structured formal arguments and empathic connections. It's an interesting alternate view to my go-to methodology of ensuring both ethos, logos, and pathos in the argument. In the article, Letitia illustrates this with a clip from The Office. My reading is that this shows mostly empathic connection and at an exaggerated high level that I could never match. One practical way to ensure this is to have two people in the meeting with complementary strengths and focus. And I think this feels like a dramatic improvement. And I think it comes off as much more professional than just being a single person. Have business cards and a crisp one-pager, a flyer to leave behind. Taking notes is a good idea, even though it should be used sparingly. I'm normally a prolific note taker, and I would tone this down for such a meeting. Though writing down the questions does seem serious, and I would strive to write down the questions without breaking eye contact. You'll slip. Everyone does, and you need to shrug and correct and keep the attention on the discussion and not the misstep. And yeah, when one is doing something difficult, then this is a fact of life. And removing this kind of distractions from social errors is important. The subtitle for this article is, "So You Want to Talk to a Lawmaker?" And I'm pretty reluctant to. It's a distraction if it doesn't meaningfully reduce the risk of an existential catastrophe. My central conclusion is that I basically don't know. And this is an area where I'm much more uncertain about this question than in most questions within AI safety. So my probability is right now around 33% that I will talk to a lawmaker in Denmark. So let's delve into how I can reduce this uncertainty. A friend of mine, Mathias Kirk Bonde, is a Danish policy advisor who I believe have joined Letitia's tour, and I intend to reach out to him and get feedback from him and hear his thoughts, and I intend to give great weights to his thoughts. I could also reach out to Letitia or Akash, and possibly also others in my network. It's priced into my 33 probability that these people are cautiously optimistic, conditioning on substantial preparation. Matthias knows me well, and if he directly says bad idea, then that will update my probability by quite a bit. Alternatively, Matthias might want to join me, and that increases the effectiveness dramatically, and I just might go then. One of the core uncertainties revolve about how serious the downside risks are. My model here is pretty lacking. Another core uncertainty is Pause AI. Pause AI branding has recognition and a proven playbook, and maybe some downsides I haven't quite mapped. The 33% estimate is a weak prediction that could easily change as I learn more or new evidence arrives. It would be much more. I would be much more likely to arrange such meetings if we observed a warning shot. I don't think we are likely to get that, but it's not that unlikely. It's a thing that could happen. Another way I could update would be if I had a better ask. Like if someone makes a Danish open letter, then I might help out getting signatures for that. I know some motivated people who might want to do something like that, and that I expect would do a pretty bad job. And so if I couldn't stop them, then I might join them, some kind of damage control, maybe. Another thing is like if someone can come up with an event that is kind of related to Yudkowsky's new book. If someone else figures out to make the lawmakers read that, then I could obviously answer questions. And finally, something that is important to me is if the lawmaker is actively expressing interest. If they have questions and they don't know who to talk to, then I would consider it a duty to meet them. And this isn't impossible. That concludes my presentation on what we learned from briefing 70 plus lawmakers on the threat from AI by Leticia Garcia Martinez. See you again on the 19th of June. Ceterum censeo machinam sapientem esse delendam.